So I have good news and bad news for you, Joe Bulig.
Oh, fun.
Well, the good news is that, remember a while back I mentioned Ali Abdaal listed us in his YouTube video?
Yes.
Well, he's got a Twitter thread now, and Bookworm is number 3. So that's the good news.
Number 3. So I saw this thread. What were the other two ahead of it? I don't even have it in front of me because I didn't know you were going to bring this up. But to me,
Well,
somebody like Ali Abdaal probably has a long list of podcasts that they listen to. So it's a curiosity to me that it's within the top 3.
yeah, I don't remember what the second one was. Number 1 was the Tim Ferriss show, I believe. And I bring this up because, number 1, it's cool to see Bookworm included in these types of lists.
Right.
But that brings us to the bad news.
There was no link. No link.
Yes. As Scott Deller mentioned to me, well deserved. He could have linked you, though. So this is twice now, Ali. I know you listened to the show. You sent the wrong link via YouTube and you shared it via Twitter and no link. So I appreciate the fact that you listen and you love the podcast, but help us help you. Throw us a bone next time. Use a link.
It's hilarious.
I don't know if he'll ever hear that, but
It doesn't matter. It's still fun.
all right. So that's my intro. Should we talk about follow-up?
Yeah, you have like 14,000 on this list.
I do have not 14,000, but several. Yes. So for context here, there were 2 follow-up items from the last episode, but I completely botched my follow-up on that episode. So instead of saying like, yeah, well, sorry, I messed it up, I promised that I would follow through with these for next time. So I did do all of these.
Okay.
I'm not sure how detailed I want to get into the specifics of all these, but I'll just share them. Make a list of things that settle me. And I guess some highlights here, going for a run, working out, reading a book, being alone, going to Door County. My parents have a place in Sister Bay, and I love going up there because it's really quiet, especially in the winter. And so that's kind of like being alone, but yeah, that is my happy place. The next one I had was, who do I compare myself to? Turns out quite a few people. And it all happens to be around these things that I do. I guess that might be obvious if you're thinking about who you would compare yourself to, but it's other creators, it's other writers, it's other people who are athletes or runners. So basic version of this is you go to the gym and you're doing the bench press and you see some guy sit down next to you and you're, I wonder if he can do more or less than me, right? That's the immediate comparison. But with runners specifically, it always kind of, whenever you talk to another runner, it kind of devolves into like, well, what's your pace?
Right.
And I'm not fast. So this one kills me every time I talk about it.
So that means, Mike, when you bring that, when that comes up, it's like, hey, it's 12 minutes a mile for all 24 miles I run every day. Like, you know what I mean? I know that's an exaggeration. I'm aware of that, but that's my point. Like, the distance can then be the thing that overcomes the other person.
Yes, it can. However, the people who are really good, who you might want to like position yourself and favorably compare yourself to, are completely smoking me.
Yeah.
I remember running a half marathon and seeing my time, and I'm like, oh, hey, I felt like I did pretty good. Maybe I should look into running a full marathon. I wonder, because I have a sister-in-law who's run the Boston several times. Like, what are the times for the men in my age group to qualify for the Boston Marathon? And it was basically running a full marathon in the time that I ran the half. Like, nope, not for me. Guess I'm not that good.
Yep. All right. Valid point.
Yep. Other people who podcast, other people who make sketch notes. I mean, basically anything that I do, there's a comparison to like, well, I wonder what other people are doing in this arena.
And you can always find somebody. Like if you're trying to figure out how you rank on something, you will always find somebody that you can compare to. And you can also always find somebody who is better than you. So that doesn't mean you should stop doing the thing you're doing, but the comparison piece is the problem.
Yeah, that's the context for all of this, is that comparison is bad. So this isn't something that I should be doing. It's just recognizing that I have this tendency. Next one was to make a list of good, small, ordinary things. And this one I think is going to continue. I think I'm going to just keep adding to this list as I think of things. But I've got 8 things on this list already. I have a cup of, in quotes, good coffee.
Yep.
Because I have discovered recently that what I consider to be good coffee is completely snobbish compared to most other people. So I can't just say, is this a good cup of coffee? Because different definitions of good.
Yep.
A long run, a good book, petting my dog. My dog, I don't think you've met Lucy.
I have not met Lucy. No.
She's a giant golden doodle, like probably close to 70 pounds. She's supposed to be 45. And she's like a gentle giant. To me. Yeah, she's ginormous, but she never tries to come up on the furniture. She never like jumps up on anyone. She does this thing where if I'm sitting in one of those chairs in the corner reading a book, she'll come and she'll like put her head on your lap and want you to pet her. And then eventually she will just lay underneath your feet. She just always wants to be by you. So she's basically, whenever I'm sitting reading a book, she's within arm's reach.
Nice. Nice.
So one of my favorite things is reading a book and petting my dog.
Petting the dog. Nice.
I've also gotten the habit of taking naps on Sundays, which is amazing.
That is amazing. That is actually, it's how do the girls refer to it? It's daddy's sleep time, I think is what they refer to it out, because I have done this for, it's probably approaching a year now, where Sunday afternoon naps have become a thing on my part. And I had a friend, we were talking about, taking a Shabbat Sabbath dinner, that sort of thing. And they said something about a Shabbat sleuth. Like that is a technical term, I guess, in some circles. Like, oh, I could do that. Shabbat sleuth. That's my thing now. Like I will take that one on full steam ahead.
Interesting. Yeah. So I've fallen in love with the Sabbath nap, as I call it.
Yep.
And other things I like, home cooked meal, playing board games with my kids. But I know that there's lots of little things, or basically if I express gratitude for something in my daily questions journal, essentially that is the type of thing I want to add to this list and have this list that I can just go look at anytime I need to pick me up. Find a way to do some unprompted kind thing every day. I've been doing this, but not every day. So I guess I've quasi failed at this again. I don't know. I feel like the spirit of the action item is to get me thinking this way. And I would like to improve my success rate on this, but I feel like this is a win already, just starting to think this way, sending the encouraging text message, stuff like that. And then the 2, which were from the last episode. How can we get more lean at work? These are just thinking time questions. And how often do I look for opportunities to cooperate or collaborate? I guess would be another way to say that. These have sparked a whole bunch of insights for me in the last couple weeks. Nothing specifically that I want to share here, but these have been really successful. Again, proving that the best action items for me are the ambiguous ones that I just think about.
Yeah, it's kind of how it goes anymore, right? And I feel like that's actually, this is a diversion, but it might actually be a progression of Bookworm. I've kind of wondered about that. Because when we first started, there were a lot of tactical action items. Like, I am going to put this timer on my desk and use it all day long. Like that type of task. Anymore, we've got these kind of higher level action items, and I wonder if it's purely like a progression of what we consider as something to work on. Like it's more mindset stuff than it is physical stuff.
Very true.
I say that, and yet the 2 action items I have are very tactical from this last round. One of which had already completed when we recorded, and that is, I don't think you can't see it on stream, but there's a whiteboard here right behind me. It's right there. I know you can't see it. But that has proven to be invaluable for my little worker bees and myself. So that has been something that's just kind of gold. I just regularly, they'll come up, hey, Joe, just real quick. I was like, nope, go write it on the board. Like, unless it's mission critical right now, go write it on the board. And I will see it tomorrow morning. And that has in itself saved me many, many, many times in running off to solve some problem I don't need to solve right away. So love the whiteboard. The other one was to work on my environment, and I wasn't sure what that meant when I detailed it. And I have started to figure out what that means, because the goal is to set up the environment to allow me to maybe be a little more creative and have more focus on the work that I'm doing. And some of that is as simple as the door to this room, regularly, just without me thinking about it, it's always wide open. It's a little weird to have it shut all the time, because then people don't know if I'm here or not unless they see the currently recording sign on the door handle. So that feels a little weird. But I did learn that if I close it like 75% to where it's like mostly shut, but it's still open, it's open enough that if somebody really needs something, they will open, knock, and then come in. But they're more prone to letting me be at that point. So then that one small thing has actually proven to be very helpful. At the same time, we've started like moving a lot of gear in this room to kind of get it out of this space where my desk sits, which frees me up to stand a lot more, because sometimes I don't stand at this desk just because I've got a pile of speaker monitors behind me. So I can't roll the chair back because it'll slam into speakers. So just simple stuff like that seems to make a big difference. And I'm continuing to just kind of see like, okay, what happens when I make these small changes? And it's amazing to me how much of that little subtlety can make such a big difference just mentally. So far, limited success, I would say. Maybe not limited, but continuing to work on it. That might be an ongoing thing here for a while.
Nice.
Super fun.
You ready to talk about where ideas come from?
Yes, I am.
All right. Well, today's book is Where Good Ideas Come From by Steven Johnson. And this was a book that I picked, and I had heard from several people about Steven Johnson and this book in particular. So it kept coming onto my radar, and with the whole topic of PKM fascinating me, I figured this would have some overlap with that. I did not expect it to speak directly to software. Spoiler alert, he does a little bit, even in this older book, which is surprising.
And his choice of software is fitting for the time frame too.
Yes, exactly. So stay tuned for that. But essentially, it's really about how do good ideas come about, which I think is a fascinating concept. The book itself is not like your traditional book. There's an introduction, there's a conclusion, and then there are 7 chapters in between. There are not multiple parts. They're not even labeled chapters. It's just the number and then the thing. So a little bit different, a little bit refreshing approach, I would say, to this. Before we get into the specifics, though, what were your first impressions of this book?
All sorts of things. So I wasn't real sure what I was getting into when I read the title, Where Good Ideas Come From. In my mind, it was potentially going to go down the route of a systems book. Like, here's a process you can go through to come up with good ideas. Like, I had that as a potential in the back of my mind. But then if you read the subtitle on this, The Natural History of Innovation, it kind of lends itself to saying that probably that's not going to be what you're going to get out of this. If you read the whole paragraph and bio of sorts on the back of it, it would tell you that you're probably not going to get a system out of this. And yet somehow I thought that was maybe going to happen. But if you continue the whole how to read a book concept and through the table of contents, like what you were saying, it definitely could have been put together in a 3-part book. It definitely could have been a whole bunch of things. But I feel like they did really well in just saying, no, it's not a 3-part book. It's 7 segments, intro, conclusion, with an actual real conclusion for once. I feel like that's maybe a breath of fresh air. We'll get there. And then there's this massive amount of like acknowledgments and appendix and stuff on the back. But something that's in the back that I kind of wish more books did. But there is like a further reading section in the back that I tend to appreciate. Now, that said, a lot of these are his own books. Or are they all his own books? Anyway, I think it is helpful to just kind of see, like, here's some other stuff that you can read that's similar to this topic, and that's something that I wish more books would do. I know that a lot of books will reference other books within it, and that's a lot of times how I come up with ideas for the next books that we're going to read. So overall, I liked it, but the layout of it and the structure of it, it was definitely a breath of fresh air, just based on what we normally see.
Agreed. It is definitely a different type of book. Let's actually go into the introduction here, because this really sets up the framework that he uses throughout the rest of the book. This appendix, by the way, I think it was the last book, the Great Mental Models, Volume 2, you were surprised at how small the appendix was.
It didn't exist.
This book made up for it.
Yeah, it absolutely did. I'm just looking it up. It's like, how long is this thing? Because that's the bibliography.
Yeah.
It's long. 40 pages.
The book feels bigger than it is, because it's 247 pages, I think. And then there's a whole bunch after that. Feels like you're only about 2/3 of the way through the book when you're physically holding it.
Right.
Which is all appendix and references and things like that, which he addresses how and why he used the format that he did later on in the book. But in the introduction, he really pieces together 3 different metaphors, I guess, for idea generation. One of them is the coral reefs and Darwin, and how he recognized that this is a very small percentage of the Earth's land mass, but it houses an insane number of the majority of the species. It's a disproportionately high percentage. And then he talks about cities. And then the third metaphor that he uses is the internet, or the World Wide Web. So a lot of the arguments that he makes in all of the other chapters following this are all filtered through these metaphors, which I'm curious if you thought that was successful or not. How did you feel about this approach setting up the rest of the book?
At the very beginning, like when I read those particular pieces, it was one that I felt like this could either go one of two ways. Like he's setting me up with these 3 different stories, and it seems to work pretty well, at least in the intro. But, at that point, I wasn't so sure that it was going to continue throughout the rest of the book. You could kind of, like, that happens pretty commonly. Like whatever is pitched in the introduction seems like it carries on throughout the rest of the book. Like that's the recurring theme you're about to get. That seems to be a common thing, which is partly why I tell people, be sure you read the introduction, because a lot of people I've learned skip it, which seems weird to me. But given that he takes these 3 different concepts with Darwin and, inner city life and, the World Wide Web, taking those 3 stories and carrying them throughout the rest of the book, it seems to work pretty well. Knowing quite a bit about each of those 3, there's a bunch of like places that you could say are loopholes and potential foundational problems with that particular approach, like what the details that he's going to talk about throughout the rest of the book. So I'm not sure how well it played out time it was done, but it's kind of a cool way to do it, I think. Having these 3 different ones that you're going to carry through the whole book, that part was fascinating to me versus the standard, let me pitch this one idea that we're going to talk about throughout the entire book. No, we're going to come at this from 3 completely different angles, and I'm going to give you examples and stories about each of them through the entirety of this text. That I greatly appreciated. Like that really puts some teeth to the content here. So very grateful for that part.
Yeah, and actually, let's just talk about that a little bit. I mentioned he kind of explains his approach at the end of the book, but I don't think it really fits with the arguments and the things that we're going to be talking about. So let's just talk about it here.
Okay.
He says, essentially, there's a couple different ways that you can attempt to write a book like this. You can select a single example or very few examples, and that is your case study. You're going to go really deep on this one example. The problem with that is that you have potentially cherry-picked one example, and it may not represent the larger sample size. It doesn't really tell you what's going on in that particular domain. You really have to have confidence that you picked something that represents the whole. So another option would be that you can select a whole bunch of stories and kind of piece them together. And that's kind of what he's tried to do here. There's a whole bunch of stories. And I would argue that he does a pretty good job of telling those stories. But again, he's working them into this framework with these three metaphors that we mentioned at the beginning. And he calls out that, again, there's a possibility here that you're cherry picking things and you get it wrong. So essentially he's saying, like, you got to pick the lesser of two evils here.
Right.
If you really want to go in any sort of depth. And so he basically calls out, this is what I have decided to do, and this is why I've made the decisions that I've made. You can see his perspective, and I don't think that either of us would 100% agree with everything that he says in here. But I at least appreciate the transparency there. I don't think I've ever read another productivity book like that, where essentially they're saying, I recognize that what I'm sharing here is not just obvious fact, and you're going to have to trust me.
Right.
And I wish more authors would take that approach.
Yeah. And this is where, and I was trying to figure out where to put this in this episode, but that sets it up really well, in that because of the way he's approaching this, it lends a lot of credibility to what you're about to read, because there's so much that he calls out here saying, there are potentially flaws in this. Kind of like what I was saying, like there are points in each of these three concepts that I feel like I would disagree with or argue with, but collectively the idea comes across. Like I can nitpick on his examples and his metaphors here because I've read Darwin's on origin of species. Like because I've read that, like I know some of the things that are in there that he's not calling out here that might change what he says here, but he didn't call that out, and he did use that particular route of thinking, and that is not the point that he's trying to make here. Like that's an adjacent issue that's not impacting the topic or the idea that he is presenting. So that said, like it doesn't take away from the book, I don't find. It's simply something I would disagree with. But because he has these three different examples and he calls out that, hey, there's probably problems with this. Like, oh, okay. That means that now this is an open dialogue between me and this author about whether or not the concepts are true, like the philosophies that he's going to present here, are they true or not? Well, he's working his way through it. I'm fine having that dialogue because he's allowing me to have that dialogue. He's not telling me, hey, this is the only way this works and you have to listen to me. That's not what he's saying at all. He's like, I'm working through this as well. So because of that, it's a lot easier to give grace when you're working through it.
Yeah, that's a really good description. I had the same reaction. So just to call it out, obviously he uses Darwin a lot and evolution, Big Bang, stuff like that. I was a biology major in college, and I remember sitting in my freshman biology class, and my professor, who was teaching the theory of evolution, was like, yeah, so the basis for all this stuff is radiocarbon dating, and this really doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry, just take my word for it.
Yep.
And I've never done well with somebody who just says, take my word for it.
Yep.
So the only nitpick I really have is with the dates. I don't really know. And I don't want to argue specifics with that because it's not relevant with what he's really trying to do here. Number one, he's using three different examples, like you said. So it's a framework for discussing a concept, not debating facts,
right?
Which means that we can have that dialogue, like you said. There's no direct challenge. You're either right or wrong. We can just have a conversation. We can learn from it, which is really the whole idea when you read a book. Going back to how to read a book, there's our obligatory how to read a book mention for this episode.
So true. Yeah. Has to come up a lot.
It's so good though. I mean, one of the most important things I got from that was that when you read a book, you're having a conversation with the author, and what you are supposed to do is not just blindly accept that everything that they tell you is true, but you're supposed to understand their arguments and then respond. I feel like this book is perfect for that.
Yep.
If you're reading how to read a book and then you're like, okay, now I need one to practice on, pick up this one.
No kidding. Yeah, because it does. it does all the things, right? There's probably a couple that it doesn't. In
Sure.
that in Adler's book, How to Read a Book, he has a specific call towards a very well laid out table of contents. That is not here. It's just almost single words per segment. So it really doesn't give you a whole lot about what you're going to cover in each section. And then it also doesn't really do a very good job. Like if you were to just flip through and try to scan the book, because it's so story heavy and because it's got very little for like subtopics within a segment, within a chapter, it's kind of tough to get a general idea when you're skipping through it ahead of time before you start reading to get your general gist of the book before you dig in. So like according to Adler, like those two components would be missing here. So not to say that it's bad in any way, it's just different. But that all said, there's a lot to love here for sure.
All right. So let's get into the meat here. Chapter 1 is the first very interesting idea that this book about ideas introduces us to, and that is the adjacent possible. I love this term and this idea. The adjacent possible basically are the first order possibilities. So if you are in a room, the adjacent possible would be the 4 doors that lead out of that room, but nothing beyond that. So if those rooms had other doors that went to other rooms, that's not the adjacent possible. It's what is right next to you that you could take action on. What do you think about this idea?
To me, it makes perfect sense that it's the first chapter in the book because I feel like this is the most common. Like
How
that
so?
might be technically wrong, but I feel like the type of innovative ideas that come out, like this is probably how most of them come about. That save maybe chapter 6, exaptation, like that one might be there as well. But anyway, things that are like right beside it. This is a really cool concept, and I especially like the term as well because when you have an existing technology or concept, an idea, and then like you see something that's like right beside it, like it's just like tipping over. It's like, oh, that'll make sense. Like that concept is really, it's really powerful when you start thinking about it that way.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to good ideas, like a single good idea can change your life is something that I've said often. I don't know where I originally got that, but when you think about that phrase, you really are thinking like, well, in order to totally transform my situation, this idea has got to be completely different. But this whole book, Where Good Ideas Come From, basically is saying it's not going to be something that's completely out of left field. It's going to be something that is very close to where you are. That's the thing that's going to be the breakthrough. And I feel like that releases a lot of pressure in terms of trying to find and develop good ideas, because you don't need to go search a whole bunch of domains that you have no experience with. You don't have to give in to the FOMO that's associated with that. I feel like when it comes to making the most of what you've got to work with, that's the danger, at least for me, is like, well, there must be something I'm missing. There must be some podcast that somebody's listening to that they're getting the answers that I'm not, or they're reading some books that are giving them the answers that I'm not getting. And this kind of diffuses all of that. It's really just saying, the things that are really going to change your life are to the left and to the right of you. They're not way out there and you need this crazy roadmap that's going to lead you right there. You just need to be curious enough and look up from the day to day and what's directly in front of you long enough to consider what is possible.
Yeah, if you're willing to do that, like you're saying, like it can make some pretty massive changes for you just in your entire existence, really, because whenever you take something that's small and then look right beside it, like you've got a particular issue. I'm trying to think of a good example, but if you've got things that you're doing every single day, and then you come across something that's right beside that, like can't think of a good example right now. Well, here's one. So we were talking about earlier on about, how I've been changing my environment and stuff. And there are a lot of different ways that people store sound equipment, right? Some people will put the microphones in bags and then they make a pile of the bags. Some people will drill holes in things and stick all the microphones down in that so that they're all in a line. And it really occurred to us as of like last week that we could really combine a couple of those things and take better care of our microphones and yet have them easily accessible. So we just have little bins that are labeled with the mics in their bags that can be stacked. So I can actually use more space that way. But that idea came from us walking from the workroom, which is literally right next door to the sound storage room, where they had a whole bunch of bins sitting there. Like, this is a very physical, like, it's right beside it sort of thing. So to me, it's kind of like that in that, like, we saw this idea here. This kind of delves into chapter 6 a little bit, but it takes an idea from this spot right beside us, and then we can use it in this existing place. So it kind of floats over from side to side there, but it is an easy way to take existing ideas or take an idea that you need to, or a problem that you need to solve, and take an idea right beside it to come in. I feel like I keep saying the same thing, but it feels different in my brain. But hopefully you get the point.
I do. The example that they used that really stood out to me from this chapter was Charles Babbage. He created the difference engine and the analytical engine, which was over 100 years before the first computer. And it did not take off. And the argument that Stephen Johnson makes is that it was because it was outside of the adjacent possible for everybody in the culture at the time. And I feel like the same argument could be made for something like Apple's Newton. And I'm sure there's a million other examples that non-Apple people can use to fill in this this too. But that's the one that comes to mind for me. It's essentially an iPad before the iPad, but it was so far before the iPad that no one really saw the value of a tablet-like device like that. And that's generalizing a ton. I get it. But we can all identify those different examples where something is a good idea, but it's the wrong time. And that's just because, in Stephen Johnson's words, the culture is not ready to accept that yet because it's not yet in that adjacent possible. They can't figure out why that's beneficial because there's no clear path from where they are to where that is. I think that's an interesting idea. I don't know what practically comes from that other than to look back at history at some of the things that were quote unquote before their time. But I think if I were to pick something that's a applicable takeaway from this, it's not to assume that everybody is going to be as excited about whatever new thing you're bringing as you are. And you have to consider where they are and what they are experiencing and what they are able to see. If you can't chart a real clear and short path from here to there, it's just not going to work because this is how people operate. This is where good ideas come from, is that adjacent possible. It's like if it's not in the adjacent possible for a lot of people, it's not even an option.
Yeah, probably a good example of this is from the book is the story of YouTube and its beginning, where like people were able to watch videos online, but they didn't really have a place to share their own online. So like that, the things that were currently happening, like you could watch videos online. In a lot of places, the bandwidth capabilities were fast enough that you could watch videos online, which meant that it was adjacently possible now for people to upload their own to a social network of sorts way back in 1995. Like that became possible. But if they had done that 10 years prior, the web was already around and the concepts were there. Like technically they probably could have pulled it off. But because people weren't used to watching videos on the web yet, and because the download speeds were not there yet, it would not have been really possible for it to take off. Whereas when it did release, it exploded within a year because that collection of requirements made it a possibility for it to take off.
Yep. I forgot about the YouTube example. There are so many examples in this book,
Yeah.
and that's really the powerful thing about this. I gave up trying to detail all the stories that they're
Yeah.
telling because it was impossible. But that's the beauty of it too, is that there's so many examples. One of them is going to resonate, and that's the one that you dive deeper into, and that's the one that allows you to connect the dots that you weren't able to connect before. That's actually a good place to go into the next chapter. So let's do that. Chapter 2 is liquid networks. Do you have a definition for a liquid network?
So maybe the best way I could come up with this is like the easiest example I can think of off the top of my head is if you think of a cup full of water and it's overflowing, and then that water goes everywhere else. Like that, to me, that's the easiest way to think of it, just because by a liquid network, I think what he's referring to is you have a collection of people in an area that, because they're simply around other people, you can't help but absorb some of the ideas from those other groups. And then that can inform your own thinking on an idea and develop an idea. And those ideas can come out of that kind of oozing out of concepts from other groups. That's kind of how I think about it. Now, whether that's the way he would explain it or not, I don't know, but it seems to make sense in my brain.
Well, I like that definition. I'm glad I asked you first, because I think the big thing I got from this is that a good idea is always the result of a network. The size of the network is important for good ideas, and you have to be able to bump into things like you were talking about. It's not clean, it's not tidy, even though that's what we tend to do. We tend to condense the origin stories of our best ideas into tidy narratives, but it's never really that simple. And I like the idea of a cup overflowing, and because there is no way to prevent those things from bumping into each other. I think the big thing I took away from this when I read it was that the network has to be plastic, is the definition that he uses, able to adopt new configurations. So essentially, it doesn't need to be as messy as an overflowing cup of water, I think, but it does have to not be solid in its configuration, and it has to be adaptable. It has to respond to different forces from the environment.
I think this concept is one, I don't think people would have said it, but this concept is one that had a pretty big impact on the idea behind open layout offices. Like this kind of connection and letting people run into each other sort of thing, like building those networks, I think is a big part of why people were doing that, because they're trying to create those instances where you're sharing information across departments and such. So like that idea is kind of what he's getting at, and it does work. I don't think that people would say that forced liquidity in that case is a good idea. We've learned that that's not a great thing long term, so don't do that, please. Open layout offices are terrible. Please don't build them.
Yeah. It mentions that the innovative systems tend to gravitate to the edge of chaos. So that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. I guess I'm getting better at being okay with being uncomfortable when it comes to that sort of stuff, though. I recognize that that's where a lot of the good stuff happens, but and he also mentions that to make your mind more plastic, you need to put it in an environment that resembles a mind exploring the boundaries of the adjacent possible. That's interesting, and that kind of ties back to your action item of considering your environment, I feel. Now, that could be physical environment, but it could be a bunch of other things as well. So I thought that was interesting. And then ends, or one of the last things he talks about in this chapter is that the most productive tools for generating good ideas are humans around a table. That is going to make the introverts who don't like open offices uncomfortable. But I do think it really is important to recognize when to deploy that tactically. That is absolutely the best scenario if you want to generate good ideas, is get face to face and talk about things.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that idea, like the idea of like getting together in a room to talk through situations or a new concept of some kind, that that is something that as an introvert, I am always like, no, don't make me do that. But then when it's done, it's usually a good experience. Like I know that I've got one of these coming up here soon. We're in the middle of remodeling our church website. So I'm kind of quarterbacking that whole process. And there's a fair amount of let's talk through our existing website. What do we like? What don't we like? Let's find new ideas for things. Like let's talk through each potential feature. And then we can start to wireframe some ideas for what that could become based on all of that feedback. But all of that is dependent on us getting together around a table and just talking through all of these potential things and trying to make sure that everybody gets a voice in that process. Right or wrong, doesn't matter. Let's just talk about it. And keeping that group small. You don't want that to be a huge group. Just saying.
Agreed. Anything else from this, or should we move on to the next chapter?
No, we should slow down, though.
I don't know. I think there's some good stuff to get into here in a little bit. So chapter 3 is the slow hunch. And this essentially, if I were to summarize this, is that you're never going to have that eureka moment right away. It takes some time to connect those dots. You have to kind of brew on things for a while. And he used a phrase in here which reminded me of the 5 C's of creativity that I put together. I hadn't read this book at that time, but it's the middle step for me is cultivate. And that was like a big aha moment for me, is that I have these ideas, I put them into my system, and then I don't really know what they're going to be for a while. I have to give them the right conditions and let these ideas mature. It's kind of like you put seeds in the ground and you got to water them and give them sunlight, and then they poke through, and then you kind of see what you've got. Maybe you're a master gardener, you know what those seeds look like. I'm not, so it's not till they poke through and they actually start producing some fruit that I'm gonna be able to tell what they are. And that is essentially what he's talking about here with the slow hunch. And he even used that word cultivate, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of examples here, but the concept of a slow hunch is probably, well, no, I wouldn't say it's like your classic Hollywood version of eureka moment, but it's one of these where you've been thinking about something for a long time, and you probably can't put your finger on what the grand idea is quite yet, but you're like one step away from it. Like you've got a whole collection of background that you're leading up to something, and you don't really have the final answer, but you're building, and it could take decades to get that all built up. For example, one of the ones that I like personally that I've been kind of working through is this concept of building daily routines and seasonal routines around the sun clock, like when the sun is up versus when the sun is down. Like during the winter, we tend to slow down. During the summer, we speed up. Like that concept is one that I've been like working through from a productivity stance. Now, I don't know what comes of that. I don't really have any like, here's what that means. Like, here's the routine process I feel like you should work through. And here's what that leads to in my life personally. Like, I don't have any of that, but I've got this whole thing that's like slowly putting puzzle pieces together that I've been working on for maybe 4 years now around that concept. So it's something that I know like I'm working my way towards. To me, that feels like the type of thing he would refer to as a slow hunch. Like I have a feeling that there's something connected here, but I can't quite tell you what it is. So the scientists out there need to reach out and let me know the answers to the questions, because I'm sure somebody has solved it already. I just don't know what it is.
A couple of quotes here. Actually, one quote and then another idea that I wanted to call out. Page 78, sustaining the slow hunch is less a matter of perspiration than of cultivation. There's that word that I was looking for. You give the hunch enough nourishment to keep growing and plant it in fertile soil where its roots can make new connections, and then you give it time to bloom. And then related to that, keeping a slow hunch alive can be difficult. I agree with this. And this is the thing that was always difficult for me prior to, get the bell ready, Obsidian. I would just capture things whenever I would think of them into drafts, and then I would have this giant list of things. And then transfer all of that stuff without any sort of quality control cut to a task manager like OmniFocus. And then I've got a whole bunch of things in there. And that initially it was like, hey, great, check this out. I've got all these things that I can possibly take action on whenever I want to, but they just sat there. I never did anything with them. They got old and they got stale, and then I threw them out after a while. And so, yeah, it's a lot more work to put stuff into a software program and create links and connections between things. But I kind of feel like that's part of the cultivating effort. And you don't want to do that with everything. You want to do that around the stuff that really matters to you. So for me, for example, when I did the Linking Your Thinking workshop with Nick Milo, you have like this capstone project. And mine was this cross-reference of all of the sermon sketch notes that I have taken, which, by the way, if you want to see what that looks like, I've got a public version of it at notes.faithbasedproductivity.com now. Essentially what I do is I take sketch notes of the sermons that I listen to, and then I have a coding system. I draw a box around the verse references, and each one of the verses is an individual note in Obsidian, thanks to Joe Bulig and his fantastic scripts. And then what I can do is link those things together based on the notes that I've taken and kind of build my own cross-reference library. I'm taking that a step further, by the way, getting maybe a little too nerdy here, but I added a YAML section to each one of those verses.
Okay.
And I'm applying tags at the note level for Bible / whatever, and those are going to be like broken down into different themes. Once I have gone through and added all those, because I have all those like different color highlights in my paper Bibles, right? So I'm going to add all that stuff, and then I'm going to package that all up as something that people can download as like a starter vault.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
I think that is pretty cool. But that's kind of the point, is like, I know exactly how I want to be able to use this, and the value of linking those things together, how that can help me see new things and cultivate new ideas based on the stuff that's in there. And that's really what you need in order to make this stuff work. You can't just say, okay, every note I've ever collected, I'm going to try to connect them all. That is the path to madness.
Well, this chapter is one where the Commonplace book comes up.
Yep. And that's what I was going to talk about next.
this one, like, as soon as I read the word commonplace, and I didn't write down what the first place is that word occurred, but the first time it came up, I actually had to put the book down. I remember doing this because it was still dark outside, and I set the book on the arm of the couch. But when I read the word, it occurred to me that a lot of this book up to this point, this is like in page mid-80s, at that point, it occurred to me that so much of what people talk about in the world of note making and Obsidian, Rome, PKMs, like all this world of note connection and linking process, it really can come back to this slow hunch concept. But it can also come back to a lot of these other idea mechanisms that we're talking about here, simply because when you have things like, take the adjacent possible, because you can see other connections to notes, it makes it easy then to see what could become possible. We'll talk about in the next chapter about serendipity. That's easily connected into this concept of note making. The slow hunch, you're continually working on particular topics and trying to put them together so you can slowly build up that knowledge base to come to an idea. You can do the same thing with like liquid networks. Like you can start to see connections and spilling over from one area into another. Like you can start to apply these to different components of that note database of sorts. And it might be partially why so many people are excited about it, because they've started to have a lot more ideas than what they have previously. That might come up more as we talk about this, especially when we get to this software thing here before too long. So that particular concept of the commonplace comes up here, and like all those bells started going off for me. That's really what he's talking about. Like what just happened in my brain at that moment reading this book, that concept of having the idea pop up, like that's exactly what he's referring to.
Yeah. I mean, we've heard about the Commonplace book before. I think the most recent thing that we've read that has spoken to this is probably Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte. But there was a phrase that they use here which made the whole idea of the commonplace book click a little bit better for me. And it's with this definition of commonplacing. I love that term. I'm going to start using that. What you doing? Oh, I'm commonplacing. But commonplacing is writing down interesting quotes and phrases. That word interesting, for whatever reason, that unlocked a whole bunch of stuff for me. Because you can read a book and everyone can agree there is some great information in this book, and you may not find it interesting at all. And then according to this definition of commonplacing, then you should transfer none of the information in that book into your commonplace book. Does that feel revolutionary to you at all? It does to me, because I've always, I guess, felt a little bit of pressure, at least, to like collect the good ideas. Even if I don't think they're good, I should collect the things that other people say are good. And this is basically saying, no, don't do any of that. Just keep the stuff that stands out to you. And I know that I've talked about how when I write my MindNode files, I really just capture the things that are interesting to me. But there's always been that voice in the back of my head that's like, you're doing it wrong. You're missing some stuff. And this basically was the release that I needed to like, no, just keep doing it the way you want to do it.
Yeah, this is actually, I was trying to find it. I wrote it down somewhere, but I can't place it, where he was talking about that concept of the interesting components, because I had the same feeling that you did, in that like, I always feel like whenever I'm taking book notes or I'm taking notes in a meeting or something or on a sermon, you name it, I'm always like trying to catch, okay, what are all the topic points? What are the sub points? Like, I'm not writing down verbatim quotes that struck me. I'm trying to capture the entire thing, whether it's a meeting, whatever, book. It's more like I'm trying to capture the gist of it, as opposed to the things that I found fascinating or I wanted to dig more into. And when you come at it from the perspective of, no, I'm just going to write down the things that are of interest or that I want to come back to at some point, because sometimes it is a high point. Sometimes it is a known thing, a known topic that it's not especially interesting, but you do want to come back to it because you feel like you missed something there. Like those two pieces, starting to capture just those and being free to just let the other stuff go away because it's no fun. I think that's incredibly freeing. But I also know that some of maybe my angst with that, and maybe this is some of yours as well, Mike, is probably because we make things for the internet, in that, like, I feel like I got to capture all this stuff because all the people who follow me on Twitter are going to expect that. And that expectation then kills the process, as opposed to me just grabbing what's interesting. So I'm not real sure what to do with that particular component of this, but I definitely like the freeing concept of like, let's write down, let's commonplace the interesting. Let's not commonplace everything. That part is freeing, yes.
Okay, cool. Well, let's go into the next section here, because we kind of talked about this a little bit already, but this, I think, is the reason why you just need the stuff that is interesting. The stuff that isn't interesting is not going to contribute to Chapter 4, serendipity. And serendipity is the power of accidental connection. So if it's not interesting, you're not going to be turning these things over in your brain. And really the thing that makes me uncomfortable about this is a phrase at the beginning of this chapter: the more disorganized your brain is, the smarter you are. I don't like that.
I'm really smart then.
It's true.
Because last night Becky and I were running errands. Kids were at Awana, and there was a conversation we had earlier. I'm not going to give you all the details because it'll take too long. We had a conversation when we were at the house. We were headed to the store, and she mentioned something else, and then I brought something completely unrelated to either one of them up. And I was like, okay, before I bring this up, like, here's what I'm going to bring up. Just so you're aware, and I stepped her through, there were 12 points of lawnmowers, PTO shafts, spinning rods. Like it went all the way through this progression to the topic we were talking about, which was like gardening seeds. How we got to that point, like that was just the way my brain worked. And it was like instant. Like I just immediately jumped to it. Like, sorry, race car brain. We got there quick.
That is interesting. I did not make that connection at all, but it totally makes sense. The ADHD tendencies and how that could encourage more serendipity. So, yeah, I'm gonna have to noodle on that on that one.
This is one that I feel like I run into a lot. So I really liked this one.
Sure. Well, I like the idea of the serendipity. I feel like that's the promise of a lot of these PKM apps, which, speaking of apps, this is where we tease this a little bit. This book was written, I don't have the book in front of me. I don't know the copyright date.
2010.
2010. Okay. So Rome and Obsidian are not a thing. However, DevonThink is. And he talks about using DevonThink and really the AI in DevonThink to make the connections between different things. And I really wanted updated version of this and what he thinks of Obsidian, but that's kind of the way that I've chosen to apply the principles that he's talking about here. However, the main takeaway is that software can help us think better by encouraging serendipity. And that clearly articulates this idea, this slow hunch, I guess, that I have had in my head for a long time and I have not been able to articulate well. He says that it's not just a dumb search. And I feel like you really have to read this book up until this point to really get the context of this. However, this is the response to anyone who would argue, oh, well, it's just a bunch of notes and you can search and find things. No, you're missing the point. By using a search, you've already determined what angle you're coming at this from. So that filter is going to reduce the serendipity. Does it take more time to set this up and to just play with your notes like this? Yes, it absolutely takes more time. However, if you are concerned about having more and better ideas, I think he's saying at this point that it's essential.
This is where like he spends 3 pages on DevonThink. Remember what we talked about early on? Like he called out that there's going to be problems with his metaphors, there are going to be issues, and that's okay. But we need to have these things in order to have the conversation. Because he made that point, he brought up DevonThink, and I immediately said, oh, that's probably what they used at the time. Probably wasn't a bad tool to use at the time. We've moved on since then. That's okay. Like, that was as far as my brain went. But if he had been pitching things as, this is the way this works, this is the way you should do it, I'd have been like, no, it's a terrible idea. I'm never doing that. You're terrible even recommending that. Like, that's probably what my reaction is. So this is very different because of the way he has positioned the entirety of the book. So I'm very grateful that he did that, number one. And number two, like, this is absolutely, like what you're saying, the linking process with notes. This is something like I didn't really get for quite some time. And if you go listen to or watch some of my old streams or even some old Bookworm episodes, like I was like, I don't even know that PKMs are the thing you should be doing. But if you can stick with it for a little bit and then you have a linked note show up that you weren't expecting, that makes a connection like mentally, not in the software, and then you have an idea that you would not have had otherwise, that's when the light bulb will go off and you'll realize the whole system works. But until you get to that point and until you have that first, hadn't made that connection before, until you have that, it's probably not going to be there, and it's just going to feel like a total waste of time. MOCs are a terrible idea, Blake. Call them a map and be done.
Same thing, though. Same thing. I am nodding my head vigorously over here because I agree with everything that you're saying. And you're right. You need to experience that. You can't just describe what is going on technically. The moment that you get that first connection that you would not have gotten otherwise, you're like, oh, this is magical. And I feel like what most people do is they add all the obvious connections, which are not going to give them any future value. They're just another way that they can organize things, which again, it's not the purpose. Serendipity requires disorganization. It's these unexpected links that provide the insights. Now, I am curious if he is still, let's say he's a Apple nerd like we are. Is he still using DevonThink? I don't know, because I think there's a potential that he's still using DevonThink. I don't think it's automatically that that's what they had available to them back then. I know a lot of people who use DevonThink and Obsidian together because DevonThink is better at this kind of stuff, just like searching a whole bunch of files and grouping metadata together. It's kind of crazy how powerful that is. It's not the direct connection, backlink, or bidirectional links that Obsidian has, but they're kind of different things, and you don't have to use one or the other. Really, just find one that's going to increase the serendipity for you. Now, I have a bunch of action items from this particular chapter. 3 of my 4 action items actually are from this chapter. So one of the things he mentions, and then he talks about reading books, is that you need to allow ideas to bounce into each other. I don't know how you read books. In the past, I've tended to read one at a time. He's basically saying that's not a good idea because, again, you want to allow these ideas to bounce into each other. Okay, reluctantly, I'm going to read more than one book at a time.
You gonna be okay?
I don't know. I have trouble deciding which book to read when I'm reading one at a time. For whatever reason, that is enough friction to cause me not to read sometimes, or at least it has been. But I understand the benefit of this, and it makes total sense. So I'm going to try and do that. Another thing he talks about in terms of allowing ideas to bounce into each other is reading a whole bunch of books in a short period of time. He calls it a reading sabbatical, which I've done this before when I've gone on vacation, but I am totally going to schedule a reading sabbatical.
I was going to say, I've heard of one other person doing this. Outside of the book, and they likened it to 2 things. One, doing a silent retreat. It's very similar to that. And 2, doing a meditation retreat. It tends to flow in that realm. They actually recommended that if you're going to do a reading sabbatical, do your best to have 0 devices around and make it a silent thing. Like, you're going to do like 3 days on a reading sabbatical. Okay, well, no words coming out of your mouth for those 3 days and no devices allowed. Like, kind of combining some of those, just because then, to what you're getting at, like, it forces you to think about the material and doesn't give you an outlet to focus on other things.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't know if I'm ready to go that far with it though, because all my notes I take are on my phone, which is breaking the rules. But I don't know. I think I have enough self-control to get the 80-20 benefit there. The thing I thought of right away exactly, Blake. I was thinking of Bill Gates' Think Weeks when we talked about this, which was the original inspiration for my personal retreats. So I don't think I want to bring a stack of books on a personal retreat, but I do my personal retreats every quarter already anyways, following the framework that I put together. And I think I could easily add another day to read. And so I'm thinking of how I can do that. I think that's what I'm going to do in terms of taking action on this particular idea. And then the last one was to create an idea exchange at the day job, a place where ideas can bump into each other. All right. So I've already had this idea for like an ideas board, just like 1% improvements that anybody in the company can just add whatever they think would be a benefit to the company. And then we can together select, okay, this is the one we're going to implement. And here's what we're going to do, Scrum style, define it, ship it, whatever. So I have had that on like the back burner, but I'm going to prioritize that because I think that if you do this with multiple people, then there's obviously a lot of more benefit that can come from that. The whole idea of like the cities and allowing different perspectives, ideas bump into each other. That's the digital application of this for me at the day job. So that's my 3rd action item from this one chapter.
Nice. I have one from this chapter, but it's dependent on actually your answer to a question. which
Okay.
kind of weird. In that, reading the section in here on DevonThink and how it like connects things together and suggests things, I feel like there should be something like that in Obsidian. But does something like that exist that I'm unaware of? Like some form of like an AI service that can try to find thematic or conceptual connections outside of raw metadata connections?
Inside of Obsidian, not that I know of. I don't think it's a stretch to envision something like that. However, DevonThink, in addition to having a better AI brain for connecting these things, also is going to allow you to OCR your PDFs and incorporate stuff from that. It's just a better solution for that kind of stuff, which is why people use it in conjunction with Obsidian. Obsidian is a folder on your desktop. So if you have DevonThink, you can do this. Just point at that same folder and get double benefit.
But I don't have DevonThink and don't want to pay for it.
Well, then you're in what we call in the business a pickle.
Thus, I want to do some research on this one because I'm curious, because I know there are like AI-based services that do that type of thing given text that's thrown at it. And I don't know if that could be incorporated into Obsidian. So, dear listeners, if you know of this, please let me know. If you don't know of this, please let me know if this is something you're interested in. Because
right.
I'm very curious about it.
Ready to go on to the next chapter?
Sure.
All right. So the next chapter, which is number 5, is error. And essentially what this whole chapter is about is that a shockingly large number of the transformative ideas that have come can be contributed to contaminated lab environments. Basically, a discovery that was made by accident. They were trying to find or prove something else and then discovered this thing by accident instead, which is a really fascinating idea on one hand, but on the other hand is kind of discouraging because every time you think you've got things figured out, essentially this is saying you have no idea what you're talking about.
That's how we have the microwave. There's a few of these. Like the microwave was found because I don't even remember the full story anymore, but he was the scientist was trying to develop some way of sharing, I think it was information or like radio waves, that sort of thing. And then discovered on his way walking home that his chocolate bar he had in his pocket was completely melted. It's like, that doesn't make sense. It's cold in the lab. And then through checking things, discovered that the system he was working on, he was microwaving his pocket and melting his chocolate with it. Thus, they package it up and make the microwave. Like that's where that comes from. So complete error, or translation of an existing thing into something completely different.
The one I found fascinating was, I think the guy's name was Wilson Greatbatch, who accidentally created the first pacemaker when he grabbed the wrong spare part.
Yep. Yep.
Like, that's kind of fascinating to think about. And really what this chapter reinforced for me is you have to be willing to consider that you're wrong. If you're never willing to second guess things, you're never going to be able to benefit from the errors. And I feel like this is maybe even more important now because going all the way back to Liminal Thinking by Dave Gray, the internet is a grocery store for facts, and you can find whatever fact you want, quote unquote fact, because facts aren't truth. You can have a fact and you can manipulate that data to tell the story that you want and reinforce a belief that you have, which may actually be wrong, but you don't ever consider that possibility. You're never going to know. And I feel like that is a sad missed opportunity and not something I want to find myself falling into.
Yeah, I feel like this one on error, it's easy, I think, to see where something happens because of a mistake that was made or you discover something by accident and immediately dismiss it as bad because it's not what was expected. To me, that's the part that could be a bit detrimental here. It's like, if I don't accept that I made a mistake, first off, and that something good came of it, then I don't really have a good view of actions in general. Because if my expectation of an outcome dictates whether or not I view the end result as good or bad, then my own brain is coloring the actual results of what I'm seeing. That's a bit of an alarm bell going off, because then simple things like my expectations of my kids at a sports event, whether they did well or did poorly, if my expectation is that they should do well, but they didn't quite live up to what I expected them to do, it's immediately a bad performance. But if that's the case, I may miss those instances where they're encouraging their teammates, or like, I can't hit a basketball shot today to save my life, but I can run like the Dickens and wear people out and make some passes. Like, but if you just see me failing to hit your expectation of the basketball shots, then you're not going to see those other things. That to me is the part that could be a problem here. It's like, just because it's not what you wanted, because you made an error, doesn't mean that it immediately becomes a bad thing.
True. I think it doesn't translate as easily to sports as other things, although
Sure.
I think it definitely could apply there. I think basketball, for example, though, there's kind of generally accepted principles that everyone who plays basketball agrees, like, this is the way to do things. Now, obviously, there's exceptions to that. Like in college, we played a D3 team that was occasionally on ESPN. I think their name was Grinnell, because they would score like 200 points a game. All they did was shoot threes, and they shot within the first 6 seconds of the shot clock.
Yep.
So they just forced this crazy fast tempo game, and they were really good at it. But not very many people do something completely outrageous like that. I think when you consider the field of science and invention, it's probably the place where this has the most benefit. And really, as it pertains to what is a good idea, I think you have to define for yourself, what are you really going after here? Is it a new way to do something? Is it a different spin on something that currently exists? Like, you're trying to just figure out how to express this in your own voice? Or are you really looking for something that is a completely revolutionary way of doing something? As it pertains to creating, which is the lens that I was coming at this book from, I don't really know how to apply this. I think it's really just continuing to collecting connect dots. And for me, the big takeaway is all of those things that you have made up your mind about, be willing to change your mind about those things. Again, the closest connection I can think of is Liminal Thinking by Dave Gray, where you got this whole bubble of belief. Bubble of belief is what reinforces your perspectives, but it's all built on this tiny little sliver of what is actually knowable. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, in the field of sports, there's a greater percentage of what is knowable that is already known. But when it comes to just general ideas and creative ideas specifically, I think we're just scratching the surface there.
Yeah, I think my point is that not necessarily like the making an error in the sport. It was just about expectations. Like, because you didn't achieve a result, like, you made an error and came up with something different than what you wanted. Just because of that, it doesn't mean that the overall thing was a failure. I think that's my point there.
Gotcha. So as a coach, then basically you either win or you learn, right?
Correct. Yes. Good job, Coach Schmitz. Good job.
That makes a lot of sense. And I feel that is an important takeaway. So I'll just restate this in maybe some different words. That whenever you try an experiment and it doesn't turn out the way that you thought it was going to, don't write that off as a failure. Figure out what you're going to take away from that. If you don't, you're missing an opportunity to convert that time that you've invested and really produce what the potential that it has for you.
Just to maybe put some more teeth to this, if you remember, one of my action items from a couple times ago was the concept of a portable routine, like having these things that I wanted to do each day, but I wasn't sure like when they were going to happen in order and such. I found that I was cherry picking certain ones on certain days and certain times. And after I looked at some of that, I realized that on certain days, on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, I would tend to pick the ones where I was writing. And then on like Wednesday mornings, I would pick the ones around video. So I intended to do this portable routine concept, but that really didn't work out too well because I was always just picking the ones I wanted to do on different days. But what did evolve out of that, what I realized is that essentially I was picking certain tasks for certain mornings and other tasks for certain afternoons. So that has led me to like theming each morning of the week and each afternoon of the week based on the tasks that I was cherry picking for those times. It's like, so nice. Basically taking is like, okay, here's the thing that I attempted to do. It didn't work. I made a complete mistake in what I thought was going to happen, but it led me to something completely different. And I was willing to take that and adapt it to then become something that I've now been doing for a while with some success. So there's that.
Cool. Should we talk about exaptation?
I really like this one.
You want to introduce it then?
Yeah, so exaptation is basically taking an idea that works in one realm and morphing it to work in a different realm. Like it's an idea that already works somewhere else, but we're going to take it and put it in a new place. And this isn't in the book, but the one that actually came to my mind right away whenever he explained that was there's a movie that's called, what is it? The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. Have you seen this?
Mm-mm.
And it's a story about a small African village where this boy is able to take a device that's on a bicycle that generates electricity for a light bulb on the bike. He takes that device and he takes the bike and turns it into a windmill that can then drive a pump to pump water onto their gardens because they weren't able to get water to the gardens like they needed to. He took that technology and used it elsewhere to get something to happen. Like that's the concept. Like this concept of a bike and this little, I don't even know what the thing was called. There was a name for it and I can't think of it, but it drove the whole thing. That little device got used elsewhere to do the exact same thing, just for a different purpose. And that's really what he's talking about with exaptation. Like you're adapting something and moving it from one realm to another.
Yeah, the story that he tells at the beginning of this chapter I really liked, which is the Gutenberg press and how
this
Gutenberg
was so weird.
So I was familiar with this story. This gave me some additional details, though. All the pieces of the Gutenberg press had been around on their own for a really long time. And kind of the thing that made this all work was the fact that Gutenberg had very little experience with the wine press itself, which is what it was based off of. That allowed him to see other ways to use it. So basically, he combines that with a couple other things, the big one being the concept of movable type, which was invented by a Chinese blacksmith 3 centuries prior. So we've got this wine press and we've got this movable type, which have both been around for a really long time. And Gutenberg's like, hey, I know, we can use this to print Bibles. Which anyone who had domain knowledge of either of those things probably was like, what? That's ridiculous. You don't do that with a wine press. That's not what movable type is. But because he was inexperienced in those different areas, the term I think for this is like weak ties. That allowed the cross-pollination of those ideas across some different domains and allowed something totally new to be created because of that. The definition for exaptation, by the way, is an organism that develops a trait for a specified use, but then that trait gets hijacked for a completely different function. And the example that he used was feathers originally being developed for warmth and then being instrumental to flight. His argument is that the warmth came before the flight, which is an interesting idea. But regardless, like I feel this is really interesting, and I'm trying to think of practical ways to apply this myself. He also talks about how the most innovative companies, he mentions Apple specifically, they function more like a coffee house than an assembly line, and really just putting yourself in a place where you can bounce all this stuff around. And the fact that you're not an expert and you're talking about things is actually a benefit. So I don't know. I guess it's validation for us to continue Bookworm.
Yeah, there you go.
But I'm thinking of other ways that I can do that. Typically, when it comes to different communities and things, my initial reaction is, well, I don't want to say anything because I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to appear stupid. I want to figure it out first. And really reading this chapter, what it's shown me is that, no, actually, you've got a lot to contribute. And the fact that you don't know a whole lot about something actually means that you should contribute. The more that you get immersed in a subject, the more you're going to sound like everybody else who has those strong ties. And the fact that you have weak ties allows you to suggest things that other people aren't ever going to see.
Yeah, I consider it a strength sometimes to not know all the details about a certain sector. I find that I can come up with ideas for like building websites and writing code in really strange, weird ways that work really well because I'm not trained in it. Like that is something that I find super helpful at times. There are other times I wish I had the training in it. Like it's definitely a two-sided coin, but I know that there are many, many times that like, okay, I would rather have somebody help out or at least look at this that has no idea what or how it's supposed to work. If I'm working on something mechanical or technical, sometimes I'll have my wife come look at it and I'll talk her through it. She has no idea how it works or what it is or even what it's supposed to do, but she can at least, it's like, well, we do this when I'm cooking with cast iron. Why don't you do that with it? Like, brilliant. Let's do that. Like, so sometimes bringing somebody in from a completely different domain is exactly what you need. Like that sort of thing works really well. In the world of like creativity and like making things online, it's not uncommon for people to see someone in a different realm doing something innovative with specific coursework or articles and such or web development, and they're like, oh, that's really cool. I'm going to take the same thing you're doing but apply it to this other domain. Like that sort of thing can happen quite a bit. You just have to be willing to see it. Like that's the hard part with it, is like being willing to see or look high level enough in order to see the concept to move over. Like to me, that's the idea side of it.
Yep, totally agree. All right, the last chapter here is number 7, platform. What's a platform, Joe?
Something you stand on. Wait, okay. You didn't like that?
Sure, that works.
I mean, the easy way of thinking about this, at least the way I took it, was like this is a basis on which you're going to stand. Like again, that's why I was being obnoxious with that.
Facetious,
answer.
Yeah.
But it's
You're
a
not
foundation.
wrong.
It's not wrong, but it's not necessarily right either. It's basically a foundation of ideas that you can move. Like you can move from one foundation to another in order to change your viewpoint on something. Like that's kind of the way I came at it. It's like, okay, here's a base worldview, if you will, that I'm going to stand on, and this is going to color everything that I look. It's going to color all the things I'm looking at based on that worldview or that system that I'm coming from. Is that fair?
Yep. Yeah. So let's talk about that thing that you stand on. I like the term foundation. There's a couple things that he talks about here. Again, I was a biology major for a little while, so this stuff is kind of fascinating to me. Keystone species, which is an organism that has a disproportionate impact on its ecosystem. So essentially, every species has an impact on the ecosystem, and the ecosystem has an impact on the species. But there are certain species that just really contribute to the ecosystem itself. And there's another term here, ecosystem engineer, which is a keystone species that actually creates the habitat itself. So that is the habitat in that example is the platform. It's the people who are creating the thing that is going to uphold everything else that comes after that. Quote on page 183, platform builders and ecosystem engineers do not just open a door to the adjacent possible, they build a whole new floor. And that makes a ton of sense for me. The most generative platforms, he says, come in stacks. And this is where he gets into technology stacks, which I'm sure you have thoughts on this, and I'm curious what you think of this analogy here. He mentions Twitter, though, and for a long time, Twitter had this limitation of 140 characters. Do you know why that number was selected, that 140 characters? Did you catch this when you read it?
I did not. What was it?
It was based on the SMS limitations. So Twitter was essentially based off of text message technology. That was in the tech stack. And the approach with Twitter was different. The reason that he used this as an example is that they built it differently than almost every other web software out there, because most software is built and then the API is built. But Twitter built the API so people could post to Twitter from their cell phones. And then the site was built, which is kind of interesting, because then if you're following this narrative, Twitter tried to take back control of the API and it didn't work. And there was an uproar. And
Still is. Yep.
Yeah. But this is also why I think Twitter is still a thing, is the fact that they have these APIs and it's so firmly entrenched. And there's this platform which is larger than just the website and the first party app that people are concerned. Like Facebook would be the other example. I can't think of anybody who has a positive impression of Facebook at the moment. I mean, even if you like the platform, you assume that the app is doing crazy things and recording your audio and all sorts of stuff, because big tech and no one trusts that specific company, an individual company. That is gone, though, when you have an API and you have a community that's kind of policing itself. And I know there's a lot of people who would argue that Twitter does a terrible job policing itself. So I don't want to go any further down there, but you can kind of see, like, the reason I think Twitter still has a whole bunch of momentum is the fact that there's not a single entity that controls everything. They delegated the platform building to some key players, the developers, which has contributed to some ongoing success.
If you want to talk about like tech stacks and platforms, like your choice of technology stacks is like crazy important, because to change that stack later, it's super painful. This is why, like, Facebook is built on PHP, which is kind of laughable in today's world. Like, really? Really? And just as an example, like how platforms can have an impact. On my website, if I post a note to my website, it automatically syndicates it to Twitter. And it's a real simple, like, two code lines that I have written that take whatever I've written in Markdown, converts it to Twitter's formatting that they want, and then posts it to Twitter. That's really all it is. I can post a picture to Twitter as well with like 4 lines of code. Like that's all we're talking about, because their APIs, their stacks, their platform that they have built make that super easy. To do that for, say, Instagram, and I know that some people are like, Instagram doesn't have an API. Yes, they do. Because I post pictures to there from my own system, from my own site as well. If you want to use that system, because Instagram's owned by Facebook, in case you didn't know that, Meta, technically, in order to do the same thing, the exact same thing on their platform, it's like these multi-function processes that I have to write in order to get the right authentication codes, in order to format things correctly, to post the picture and get the code and then take the code and then post it to a thing. And then it's like this back and forth, like a 40, 50 line ordeal, because it was built after the fact and because they have so many restrictions on it. Which means that when people build like external systems, like here's an example of why this matters. If you have a system similar to Buffer, if you know Buffer, where you can schedule posts and it'll kick them out at different times. Buffer has had Twitter support from day one. Like, that was their primary thing. And that meant that Buffer took off because people could schedule things for Twitter. The platform was made for it and it did really well with it. I don't think they can do that with Instagram even today. Like, I still don't think they have Instagram support truly. They can like post a notification to your phone and then you can go manually post it. But they don't do anything automatic because the system is so complicated and so painful. So it's just not built for it. The difference between those two platforms means that depending on your circumstances, you're going to thrive on one and be destroyed on the other.
Yeah. Well, I've got a more modern example, I think, than Buffer, because I've been going through Ship 30, and the tool that they've created is called TypeShare, and there's other ones that do the same sort of thing. The value proposition of TypeShare is they give you a place where you can write once and publish multiple places. And it's formatted for the different places that things can go. So out of the box, I know they're adding additional things, but you can publish to Twitter, you can publish to Medium, and you can publish to LinkedIn. Those three things. And it appears different in each one of those platforms, but TypeShare takes care of all of the formatting and things. There is no Facebook, there is no Instagram. They talk about, because I'm part of the captain's table thing, that they've had different like mastermind calls about here's what we do in order to format things and share via those platforms. But yeah, you can't natively do it, which means I would guess that most people who are using TypeShare are not caring about those platforms. So in the long run, this is going to end up hurting them. And actually, this is a great place to transition to the conclusion if you've got nothing else to say about platforms.
Yep, go for it. Yep, because I was actually going to do the same.
Okay. So the last chapter is the conclusion, and it's titled The Fourth Quadrant. And there's this visual here, 2x2 grid, as every productivity book needs to have. And it talks about the different innovations which were created for the market by an individual, for the market by a network, not for the market by an individual, and not for the market by a network. When I say for the market, for commercial gain. They did it because they wanted to make money from it.
So just to expound on it, because this is important for the rest of this conversation. The individual side is like a single person working on it. The network side is a collective group of people working on it. Market is it's being worked on specifically for profitable gain.
Yep.
The non-market is purely like a passion project. Like, this is cool, and I'm going to share it with you.
Exactly.
Put some more on those.
Yep. And then throughout the conclusion, they take different time periods and they chart the really big innovations from those time periods into the different quadrants. And the big takeaway from this is that there's been a shift in the last couple hundred years towards innovation for non-market and by networks. So it's no individual person that gets the credit, and it's not for financial gain. And that is the fourth quadrant, the bottom right one. And they make the argument, again, this book was written 10 years ago, that today new ideas are published just so people can build on them. And I feel like that has just gotten exponentially more true as information flows faster than it ever has before. It's also interesting because it talks about how ideas can't be a subject of property. They talk about this person who was suing somebody, and Thomas Jefferson was the person who was overseeing the case, and basically it was like, no, you can't copyright an idea. It's like you just mashed together a couple of things that already existed anyways. And that's number one. It's an interesting way to end the book. And as I've been thinking about this, I think really what he's trying to encourage us to do is like, go ahead and have your good ideas. Don't feel like you need to capitalize on them from a capitalist perspective. The value of the idea is going to come back to you by sharing it.
This section is, so when we first started this, I said something about how the conclusion was a breath of fresh air because it actually tied the book together, right? That's something I was saying early on. This is what I mean by that, in that he just took us through these 7 different ways that ideas come about. Doesn't really give you anything about how to encourage those to happen, but you can kind of deduce those based on your situation. This is where the dialogue with the author piece comes in. But then you get to this section and he's talking about, okay, that's cool. Now, once you have these ideas, how do you go about it? Like, what is your purpose behind having ideas? Like, let's tie this whole thing up in a nice little pretty package and say, like, okay, here's when you're coming up with things, how do you go about coming up with them, number 1? And 2, what do you do with it once you've come up with it? And this is definitely a play to try to do this with other people and make these freely available so that more ideas can come about freely. This is the world of open source software. like 100%, which he brings up here, in that like open source software is a big group of people working together to build something, and there is no monetary gain to it. Like that is the way it is designed by nature. Now, there are runoffs. People do monetize these things. It is possible, blah, blah, blah. But that's not the main core driver there. It is a thing that he definitely encourages. And that is, to me, awesome. As somebody who contributes to open source software fairly regularly, like that is something I think is absolutely worthwhile. So I like it. I like that this all came together in this whole concept of a fourth quadrant, and I love that he came up with a name for it in that. So I like it. Good job, Mr. Johnson.
All right, should we talk about action items?
Sure. How many you got? 14,000?
Got a few. I've got 4, actually. So the first one I mentioned, I want to read more than one book at once. That's a reluctant action item. I also want to take a reading sabbatical, not a true sabbatical, extended time just where I read, but maybe adding a day to the personal retreat where I just read a bunch. The third one is I want to create that idea exchange at the day job, a place where we can capture ideas and decide on taking action and shipping certain ones. I feel once we start doing that and we actually ship some things, that's where we'll really get the traction from that, by the way. I think at the beginning, people will drop some things in there, but you're not going to really have a whole lot of focus on it because it's kind of like an additional thing into, as opposed to all the other stuff that you would normally be doing for like billable hours sort of a thing. It'll feel like one additional thing, but I'm hoping that after we do it and after we continue to make these 1% improvements and it makes people's work easier, that they'll start contributing things as they see things and trust that, we're going to follow through and take action on them. And then the fourth one, obviously this whole book and the concept of PKM, it's got me jonesing to go through the Linking Your Thinking workshop again. So I actually, a while back, Nick had an option where you could upgrade to a lifetime pass, and I did that. So he's got another one as we record this, which is going to be starting very shortly, and I have opted into it, and I'm hoping I can keep up with it. But I really just want to rethink how I'm using Obsidian. Not that there's drastic changes that I want to make, but I just want to consider the options and see if there's some low-hanging fruit, some things where I can tighten things up. Maybe there's some things that I'm doing that are a waste of time, and just reconsider how I'm using it. Obviously, I'm going to continue to use it, but see if I can't make it a little bit better. How about you?
So I have 2 primarily here. One is the one I talked about earlier, which was doing some research on an AI-based Obsidian something. Not sure what that's going to come out to be, but I at least want to do a little research on it because that might be much bigger of a project than I'm ready to take on right now. And it could also be something that I feel is very simple and I'm super interested in attempting to do. So I want to at least do some research on that. And then to kind of piggyback on your, PKM thing, like this was definitely a reminder to me that I need to be trying to make sure I spend time with that every day. I do 2 or 3 times a week, but it really cemented how important that is. So it's something that I want to spend some more time with, essentially. So that is, that's what I got.
Cool. So on the topic of like the spending time in the PKM every day, I feel like that is another data point for me that encourages using a digital journal. That really is the glue for Obsidian for me, is the fact that I use it as a journal. If you're going to go spend time journaling, it's natural to just also spend a little bit of time playing with some of the other things that are in there. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I would say like one of the things I was debating was going through the Linking Your Thinking workshop, but $1,200 for a course is just a bit spendy for me.
I get it. All right, style and rating. And this is my book, so I will go first. I really enjoy this book. I feel this is one of, he talked about keystone species, I feel this is a keystone book. There's a lot of stories in here that I had heard different things about previously, but he shared a lot more detail. You can tell there is a ton of research that has been done in this book. And as we talked about at the beginning, there's a huge appendix that supports that. I also really appreciate just the whole framing of everything that he shared, essentially saying that I've chosen this approach and I recognize that I'm making some assumptions and you may disagree with some of this, and that's okay. That you mentioned that was a breath of fresh air, and I agree with that. I don't agree with everything that is in here, and I kind of think it doesn't really matter. I think the value of this book is really in understanding the key concepts from the different sections that he goes through. And for that reason, I would recommend just about everybody pick this one up. I feel the style is really well done. He's a very good writer. It doesn't feel long or superfluous like a lot of the books that we read, especially the productivity systems books. It's like this could have been a blog post, right? But it was stretched out to a whole bunch of pages. I feel like this could have been 10 different volumes and he condensed it down into one. He's very masterful at weaving things together through those 3 different metaphors throughout the whole book, the coral reef, the cities, and the World Wide Web. So there is this very strong connection to this thread. I think I'm going to rate it 5.0. I'm going back and forth between 5.0 and 4.5. I think I'm leaning a little bit towards 4.5 just because I have already implemented a bunch of the ideas from this book that I didn't realize were from this book. We were talking about the adjacent possible, for example, and Blake had said, yeah, I feel like I've heard this before. We probably brought it up before because we've talked about a whole bunch of books that were in the adjacent possible of this one. If I were to pick one, however, this is probably the one. I think if I had to pick like a PKM book, someone's interested in the concept of PKM or they don't really like it, they don't know why, they want to learn more about it, this is the one that you pick up, I feel. So given the fact that that's a fascinating concept to me and it's really good information, even though I feel like I've already kind of achieved the transformation from some of this stuff already. It helped fill in a whole bunch of holes. It gave me a whole bunch of more dots to connect. And there were a lot of aha moments that came from this for me. I feel like if I had come to this 6 to 12 months ago, maybe a little bit longer, when I was starting to dabble with Obsidian after I'd been playing with Rome for a little while, that would have been the prime time for me to pick up this book. And I absolutely would have left thinking, oh, this is easily a 5-star book, right? So I'm trying to separate the fact that, you know, I've read some other things and implemented some other things and not detract from what is actually here in terms of content. So I will reluctantly give it 5 stars, I guess.
A reluctant 5-star. Interesting way to come at that. I will say that this one has a lot of gold in it. There are some stories here that I've heard before, but a lot of them are new. And I don't know if you felt that way, but it seemed like a lot of these were like a fresh take on an existing story or telling a part of a story I haven't heard before or something completely new. I've never even heard of that person.
Yeah, it's Ryan Holiday-esque in that way.
Yeah, definitely is. So that is definitely here and something I don't want to shortcut just because that is typically something that I value because I don't like hearing the same thing over and over again. It's easy for me to discount a book just because of that. So that doesn't happen. So I can't discount it because of that. There are a lot of things in here, a lot of ideas. Like, yeah, I know that, like the serendipity thing. Like, sure, that makes perfect sense to me. That happens in my brain all the time. Like, I get that. The concept of exaptation, like moving an idea from one place to another, like that is something I've done and worked with many times, intentionally and actively. The adjacent possible is something I feel like I've thought through a number of times. The slow hunch is something I've done on a handful of things over time. I've just not had clean names for any of these. Error. I've heard these stories many times. Like the stories he's using to explain these innovative idea generation processes, like I don't think any of these were completely new to me. Maybe that's because we've talked about creativity and idea generation enough that like these are all things that have come up before. That said, I don't think I know of another book that has them all put together in such a clean setup like this. Like this is well put together. I kind of understand where you're coming from in that, like, where do I rate this? Just because like there's a lot of really good stuff here, but there's a lot of this that isn't as groundbreaking just because of history. But I don't know that history is a good indicator of what it should be rated at. Otherwise, our ratings are all dependent on the time frame and season of life, right?
Exactly.
So that's tough to say. Now, that said, if you wanted to understand like how do ideas come about, and you're not someone who has read a whole bunch of books like we have, this is probably the right place for you to start. Like this is a nailed down, like this is going to give you all of the specifics on how this can happen if you haven't studied this in any form whatsoever. Like this is a really good place to start. So I don't know that I'm reluctant in saying this, but I'll put it at 5.0 with you. I think it absolutely needs to fit there just because like I don't think seasonality needs to dictate the rating. But at the same time, I know like this is gold as far as like understanding idea generation and how they can come about, and understanding that in such a way that you can put yourself in those situations. There's definitely like a mindset piece that comes with this whenever you've gone through it. So yeah, I'll put it at 5.0. I think this is definitely something you should pick up.
All right. Well, let's put where good ideas come from on the shelf. What's next, Joe?
Yeah, so up next, we have a book called Ritual, How Seemingly Senseless Acts Make Life Worth Living. This is by Demetrius Zigalatis. I looked up how to say his name because ain't no way I'm going to figure that one out on my own. It's basically, why do we do things like, you know, get collective chants going at sports games? Why do we have our pregame, you know, cook-offs and such? Like, why do we do these things? That's just two sports examples. There are many, many others around religion and such. Like, why do we do these things? And why do we think they're worthwhile? I think it would be interesting to work through that.
All right. Sounds interesting.
Yeah. And then what are we doing?
Then we are doing The Laws of Creativity by Joey Cofone. Do you know who Joey Cofone is?
We talked about this last time, and I forgot.
He is the founder of Baron Fig.
Yes. There you go.
Yeah. So this book is technically still in pre-order as we record this. However, if you go to Amazon, you can order it and it'll be delivered by Saturday.
Good to know. All right.
So I actually have an advanced copy of this. It's a beautiful book. It's
Okay.
It's a Baron Fig book. So that's really all you need to know going into it. But obviously the whole topic of creativity, where good ideas come from, this is something that is fascinating to me. I feel like this is going to be a fun one to talk about. I am looking forward to going through it with you.
That'll be fun. Looking forward to that one. Any Gap books?
I do not have any Gap books.
Me
It's gonna be a struggle for me to get through this one, to be honest. The Laws of Creativity, by the way, that is a really big book. It is 400 pages, I think.
Fun.
But it is a lot of visuals.
I hope so.
Yeah,
100 pages of visuals. That's still not enough to make it like normal book length.
Yeah, which is why I mentioned it. So you got a little bit of a head start, hopefully.
Okay. So get through Ritual and then dive into that one ahead of time. That's what I'm hearing. Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Yep. All right. So thank you to everyone who has joined us live today. Thank you specifically to the Bookworm Club premium members, the people who are willing to support us financially to keep the lights on here. We really appreciate that. If you want to become a Bookworm Club premium member, you get a couple of perks like a wallpaper I designed, the MindNode files for the book notes that I take, a couple of Gap book episodes that Joe recorded, And you can find out more at bookworm.fm/membership. $5 a month, $50 a year. Thank you to everyone who supports the show.
And if you want to read along with us, the book to pick up is Ritual by Dimitris Xygalatas. And we will cover that with you in a couple of weeks.